Well, it's that time of the year when we discuss, deliberate and understand the expectations from union budget. Well, the backdrop of the last two union budget has been strikingly different. It was about COVID survival and revival of the economy. Well, looks like now the economy is getting ready to take a leap forward. That is a theme on ET Now this year, the leap forward. Considering India's positioning, what will it take for India to take a giant leap forward, not just a frog leap? Let's take that conversation forward with three eminent guests. Sanjeev Mehta, past president of FICCI and CEO and managing director of HUL. Dr. Anish Shah, senior vice president of FICCI, managing director and CEO with Mahindra & Mahindra. And Subhrakant Panda, president of FICCI. So nice to have all three of you on ET Now. Thank you so very much for joining us. Mr. Mehta, the backdrop of this year's budget is strikingly different. My introduction perhaps was a question in itself. What do you think needs to be done and should be done to ensure that India is ready to take a giant leap forward?
It is good to dwell on the context when we talk about taking a giant leap forward. I think India is very well placed today. We would be growing at about in the vicinity of 7%. The inflation is contained in the vicinity of 7%. I think even the fiscal deficit should be very close to the budgeted numbers. And when you look at it from a context of 23, all the estimates that are pouring in, the global economy will be growing. It would be one of the three slowest growing years in the last 3 decades. In that context, if India grows at 6%, it would be a great achievement. And that would then set the ball for us to achieve the kind of growth we are all seeking, which would be crossing the threshold of 7-8% and be in the vicinity of 8-9%. And today, the fundamentals when we talk about our debt to GDP, the government is in the vicinity of 80%, but very importantly, we often forget the private sector debt to GDP is in 50s. This is a stark contrast to, say, China or US, which are in 3 digits, over 200%. When you look at from a balance sheet problem, the banks have been recapitalized, the corporates have deleveraged. So we are talking of a context where we are very well placed. So the first thing should be consistency of policy. And I see no reason why the government will veer away from this consistency of policy. The second is the work on recovery of the economy post the pandemic, then the sharp hit by the inflation, the relief to the poor, and the reforms, the 3 R's. That should continue in the direction in which the government has set the ball rolling. Last year we had a big, capital expenditure increase, which was about 7.5 lakh crores. And I think I don't know whether the government will have a fiscal capacity to the same percentage increase, but I'm absolutely certain the absolute amount will go up, maybe not by 35% as was there in the previous budget, but maybe in the vicinity of 15-20%. That would also augur well, and that should then start bringing in the capital expenditure, and that would then get into the kind of virtuous cycle that we will be needing for inclusive growth and, very importantly, on sustainable growth.
Mr. Shah, the comeback of the economy from the pandemic low is quite heartening, but there are different set of compulsions which are at play. World is fighting a war against inflation. Fiscal capacity and the balance sheet to expand further is limited and restricted. And 6 months from now and 12 months from now, the country will get into an election mode, which means there needs to be a balance between populism and compulsion. In the light of this backdrop, what do you expect to hear from this year's budget?
So Nikunj, let's first start with the foundation that has been laid so far. And if you look at the budgets over the last few years, there has been a growth orientation. And that growth orientation has been coupled with a number of other steps that have been taken, like PLI incentives, the steps taken to combat inflation. And I think all of those steps place India at a very good position today. And that's where I'd agree with what Sanjeev has said in terms of where India is in a strong position to start with. We will likely see some impact from global slowdown. And the second impact that we will see is from governments around the world possibly putting in stimuli for their industries. We've seen that with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. And the EU right now is already very concerned about it because they see the US pulling all the investment in from the EU. And the question is which other countries around the world will start creating greater stimuli. So that's one thing that we will have to look at. Obviously, it's always going to be a tightrope walk as it is for the budget. But the expectation would be that the path that has been set will be continued with regard to the growth orientation as we go forward, with regard to being able to attract foreign investment into India. And India today is a destination that a number of leaders around the world are looking at. Not in many cases just as India as a plus one, as Europe plus one or China plus one, but for India to stand alone on its own feet. And I think India has a potential to do that. And so it's not just this budget. I think it's a series of actions that are building up to the budget. And with the hope that the budget continues to be on that same path of growth orientation, I think it will position India very well.
Mr. Panda, while the last couple of budgets have been a departure from the past, there is no new large taxes, no draconian changes in law. The budget has been crystal clear, growth focused and growth dominated. Do you think this year's budget will maintain status quo and it will give that necessary impetus to have a multiplier effect?
Well, I think from an industry perspective, what we have gotten used to is, first of all, a government which is very proactive. So it is, policy making just doesn't happen during budget day or on budget day, but throughout the year. But I think what we have also gotten used to is the government doing what it does best, which is take steps to implement the big vision that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has brought in terms of a new India. So, I mean, the way I would look at it is that we expect this budget to be growth oriented for sure, while also keeping an eye on inflation. Because while retail inflation has now, after 18 odd months, come back within the tolerance band of the central bank, but it's certainly not something where you want to declare victory preemptively and then regret it later on. So it's more of a sort of a bifocal approach that keep an eye on the short-term imperatives of controlling inflation, but equally focus on the medium to long-term prospect, which I believe is tremendous for India. But are we expecting just status quo? I would think that we can look at something more than that.
Mr. Mehta, the pandemic has really created a great divide. The rich have become richer, the poor have been pushed down even further. Now that India has ambition to become the third largest economy in the world, it certainly cannot happen with this kind of a per capita income, with this kind of a rich and poor divide. Do you think that really needs to be addressed now?
Yeah, first, Nikunj, we must not forget that during the severe period of stress, the government ensured that no one went hungry. About 800 million Indians were provided free food grains for 2 years. And even getting into 23, they are going to convert what was given at subsidized rate into free food grain. That again augurs well. And that is the right approach the government adopted. The second is, even during the peak period when it came to government, providing relief to the MSME were absolutely in the right direction. But you are correct in saying that we should not just be looking at a headline growth number. We should also be looking at from a lens of how the wealth is being distributed in the country, how the incomes are being distributed. And that is why inclusive growth is so important. And that's where the role of, say, manufacturing comes in. If we have to create jobs, if you look forward for the next 25 years, we'll need about 600 million jobs in the country. And when you realize 600 million, it is a lot of jobs will have to move out of agri and will have to move into services and manufacturing. So we'll need to create about 10, 11 million jobs every year. And that is something which we have to be cognizant of. And the thrust on manufacturing, be it the PLI scheme, which provides scale to the industry, which makes the industry competitive, all these are steps which are going to augur well for the country. And in many cases also, the situation in the world where people are looking for alternatives, India is proving to be a great destination. We have stable policies. Our corporate tax rates have come down and they are very competitive now. Our power situation, which used to be a big crisis a few years back, it's now behind us. From a lending perspective, our banks have been recapitalized, our corporates have deleveraged. So we have now got the fundamentals to accelerate manufacturing and to ensure that more jobs get created.
Mr. Mehta, just a follow-up question. The rural economy, which is an indicator of how the real mass population of the country is moving, is going through a rough patch. Auto sales, volume dispatch numbers by FMCG companies, the kind of indicators which we are even getting in rural demand vectors, all of them are indicating that the rural economy is going through a huge stress. What can be done to kickstart that part of the economy?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You need more income in the hands of more people. Let's be very clear about that. And a long-term vision should be that from 1.6 lakhs, which is the per capita income in the country, we should move to at least 1 million. And that would mean that we would move to the ranks of a middle income country. And this is something which cannot happen overnight. We are overemployed in the agri sector. This will have to come down. And that is where, again, I'll come back to the role that manufacturing has to play from teens as a percentage of GDP. It will have to move up to somewhere in the vicinity of at least 25%, if not more. And that will help create more jobs. Urbanization. India still, when you look at it from an urbanization perspective, is in the low 30s. Urbanization will again give a fillip, but you don't want people to move to urban unless you can create jobs for them. So when you have a sustained growth rate of 7-8%, ideally moving up, just like China had nearly a 19% growth over the 3 decades, can India replicate that story? If we can do that, then I see no reasons why we cannot reap the harvest of demographic dividend.
Mr. Shah, the manufacturing sector, which Mr. Mehta alluded to, is the core of how the future multiplier effect of the economy will get created. The PLI schemes have been announced. There are some good success stories also, but a lot still needs to be done. So while the government has given a strong enabling platform with low corporate taxes and PLI schemes, what else can be done that this momentum which the industry has just about discovered in the manufacturing space, it just starts rolling on?
So a lot has been done on that, Nikunj, already. And it is now, I feel, up to the corporate sector to respond and invest. We are doubling capacity in our auto business, as we talked about earlier. We are also looking at increasing capacity in our farm business today. This is outside the purview of PLI schemes. In addition to that, PLI schemes will help us expand EV capacity, which will be the next step. So I believe that a lot of the groundwork has been laid already. And for inclusive growth, manufacturing is going to be a key factor. Auto and farm industries have created large ecosystems around as well. And therefore, OEMs investing will result in a large number of suppliers investing as well. And therefore, the ripple effect or the multiplier effect of creating jobs is going to be very significant. And that is essential for the economy to grow, for all communities to rise. Only when that happens will we be in a much better place.
Just to throw in one more angle, Mr. Shah, on the corporate tax versus personal tax. While India is one of the lowest corporate tax structures in the world, we have one of the highest personal tax structure in the world. So as individuals, do you think there is something which really needs to be addressed?
On taxation, I think a lot depends on various different factors. And that is another sort of tightrope that will be there, because it also ends up in some ways attracting capital, attracting talent, or having them go somewhere else. Where we are today, I think, is well placed overall and is well balanced versus where other countries in the world are. So I would not expect much of a change on that front.
Mr. Panda, as president of FICCI, what are your suggestions? What would the industry like to see, or is really, in a sense, hoping that this budget will deliver on?
So a couple of things. As I mentioned, I think we are expecting it to be a growth-oriented budget, and one which carries on with the good work which has been done over the past 7-8 years. In fact, speaking at FICCI's 95th AGM last month, the finance minister had made a point that this would be a template for the next 25 years, which is India's Amrit Kal. And from that perspective, we had some specific suggestions which I could perhaps share with you. One is, of course, to support the manufacturing sector, because it is absolutely imperative that manufacturing sector picks up from the 17-18% of GDP range to the mid-20s, if not a little bit higher, in order to create employment, in order to take up some of the slack in terms of employment moving out of the agri sector, which Sanjeev alluded to. But that apart, I think global supply chains are looking to move to India, and we must put our best foot forward in order to be able to get them to come to India. And in that regard, a specific suggestion we had made was the 115 BAB provision, which is for concessional taxes for new manufacturing entities, which was extended for 1 year in the last budget and is set to expire in 2024. And we have recommended that it be extended by a period of 5 years in order to give policy certainty to large corporations who are looking to move out of China or elsewhere. And these are decisions which are not easily made. It takes time to pull the trigger on such decisions, and for the units to come up and in India and avail the incentive, I think takes a little bit of time, and that was one suggestion. The second thing, which is again from a reform orientation point of view, the focus on enhancing ease of doing business. And a specific suggestion in this regard is, at the moment you see a lot of classification disputes when it comes to TDS, and that leads to unnecessary litigation. So what we have suggested is that let there be 3 TDS slabs, one specifically for salaries, which could be the TDS rate would be as per the slab that the individual falls in. But when it comes to everything else, there should be basically just 2 slabs in order to eliminate classification disputes and the ongoing or the resultant litigation. And of course, one other thing could be that I think dispute resolution should be something that is prioritized, because there's a lot of money stuck up in claims which have been contested, etc. And I think the government has done well in various areas to come up with measures which enabled long-running disputes to be amicably resolved. And perhaps that is a model which could be applied across the board and not be limited by small numbers as to the thresholds up to which such disputes could be resolved amicably. So I think a focus on enhancing the ease of doing business, and of course the government is doing a lot in terms of lowering the cost of doing business through the national logistics policy and things like that. I think all this will stand us in good stead.
Mr. Mehta, Mr. Shah, Mr. Pandya, gentlemen, really nice to have all 3 of you on ET Now, and thank you so very much for sharing your valuable thoughts and inputs.